There were people shouting out, bigger and things like that in meetings, in actual meetings.
Hi, I'm Jane.
I'm Mandy, Clare.
And I'm Bex.
And we are
Insightful Sisters.
Right, hello everybody. So tonight it's slightly different because Bex has been in the middle of a storm and so doesn't have an internet connection. So it's just me. And we've got the marvellous Mandy Clare with us tonight. So Mandy's been a counsellor since 2019, I think, for various parties. So you must be a good counsellor because you keep getting elected. So that's all good. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Mandy, how you got involved, how you became a counsellor, and particularly your interest in women's rights.
Well, I've always had an interest in women's rights, so that predated my involvement as a counsellor. And I became a counsellor because I was quite heavily involved in activism within the Labour Party from 2015 onwards. And we needed candidates, so I just thought, well, being as I'm giving a lot of time to this in any case, I might as well have an elected position, and then perhaps I can have more of a concrete influence over various different issues and have a more concrete role within politics. So that's what I did. So I was elected as a Labour councillor. I fell foul of the expectations of the Labour Party with regards to the gender critical side of things after a couple of years as a Labour councillor. At that point, I'd been elected onto the National Women's Committee, which had been resurrected within the party. And I was finding it really difficult to raise issues on behalf of female members within the branches who were coming to me and saying that they had a lot of problems, they were being bullied for raising their concerns about women's rights and retaining the rights that we'd fought for. I wasn't able to raise them. They were erased from the minutes, any comments that I made about them. There was lots of head shaking and tutting and eye rolling and, muting of the mic in the Zoom meetings and things like that. I kind of felt that I was being hounded out of the Labour Party just for not being quiet about these issues. And so I left and I became independent. And then I was re-elected again in the same seat as an independent, actually with a bigger majority, despite the fact that it's been a strong Labour seat historically. I don't think it's ever been anything else other than Labour. So I'm one of 70 councillors in Cheshire, West and Chester. It's a Labour-led council. We've got a number of groups forming now. We've got an increased number of independents as councillors have gradually left Labour over various different issues, not just over women's rights issues. And I've actually found that I'm working a lot more cross-party since I left the Labour Party, obviously, than I ever did before, because it was quite a tightly whipped role. And I was junior, within that whole team sort of thing. So you're told how you're expected to vote on things, and it's very unusual that anybody breaks rank. Whereas having become an independent, I was free then to start to, and there was a necessity to work cross-party because there were so few councillors who would support my motions on women's rights and concerns about child safeguarding and things like that. So I got used to working cross-party where necessary, quite enjoyed it, and I've sort of continued with that, that approach. Basically, I'm a member of Reform now, but I have actually continued to work quite a lot cross-party on those particular issues within Cheshire, West and Chester, just because the political makeup requires it, and I think it's a healthy way to do local democracy, if I'm honest.
And councils are really influential, aren't they, in so many areas in women's lives? For listeners who might not realise the scope of what a council does, would it be useful to think about or to talk about that?
Yeah, of
Can
course.
you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, it is really interesting, the scope of what councils do, and it's quite a broad scope. I'm not sure that people always realise exactly how much responsibility councils have in this area. So the council is responsible they provide formal guidance to schools, and they have an oversight role with schools. The schools they're responsible for their own policies, etc., but the council has an oversight role for them. And as I say, they provide that formal guidance. They run social services for adults and for children. And so their policies around how those services are provided, whether someone who is older or who's disabled has male or female carers to match their own sex. And also children are looked after children, our most vulnerable children within the borough. That's a responsibility of the local council. So our policies on how we educate children about all sorts of things to do with mental health issues, which is obviously where something like gender, gender related distress or confusion may come in. And what else? So we provide leisure services, so changing rooms. It has an impact on that, on female changing rooms, male changing rooms. We provide or commission domestic abuse services and things like that. So yeah, so when we commission services, also we'll provide support to things like, so in Chester, for example, we've got a local theatre which acts not just as a theatre, but also it's a cinema and it's a library and it's a local social community groups hub, if you like. And it's our main biggest community hub in the whole of the borough. And it's really aligned itself. It's a charity, a registered charity with a trading arm, and it's aligned itself very strongly with LGBTQ activism in the past. And the council in our area, in our borough, Cheshire West and Chester, provides over £1 million worth of funding to that venue per year. So events like Pride events, they have to be licensed by the council. Very often the council will provide funding to things like Chester Pride, the charity, or members will provide funding, say if it's like with Winsford Pride, that was the town council that organised that one. All of them have to go through Cheshire West and Chester Council to be licensed, but Cheshire West and Chester Council will often very positively promote those events. So yeah, they have a huge impact really on an individualized lived youth services as well. That's another important
Wow.
one to mention.
It,
Yeah.
it's so many things, isn't it, that are really key
Mm.
to the lives of women and children,
Yeah.
and also so many staff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huge. Yes. Yeah. The staff as well. So there's obviously they have a lot of staff networks around diversity and inclusion. I'm not sure if they have a women's network for that protected characteristic, but if they do, just given how they approach this issue, I would imagine that it's on the basis of gender identity rather than on. I mean, obviously that's going to have to change, and obviously some of our staff will need changing spaces. They will need places to get changed in the course of their work. So there's the changing facilities for our, council staff as well.
Yes.
So there's loads of areas where,
Yeah.
I mean, so many of the areas that we are concerned about and that we talk about, we're at the moment. So last weekend just gone, I attended the puberty blocker protest in Manchester, which was really a brilliant event and really well policed. And it's just really interesting because so many of the pipelines that lead children into considering whether they have a gender identity issue or not are things that are provided by or overseen by the council. There are these kinds of events that we have. It is the youth provision that we have. It is the policies and the guidance that the schools are basing their input to children on. So, and obviously our most vulnerable children in care,
Yeah.
they were a huge cohort within the Tavistock referrals. And so all of these pipelines, councils directly influence them right at
They
the
do.
grassroots level.
And I think the other thing that's happened over the last few years is that councils, because of cuts, they've stopped employing their own professionals in certain. So rather than have maybe a legal department, they might buy in services, and and we can really see, can't we, how councils have bought in all the training advisors like
Yeah,
gendered intelligence and so on.
definitely. Yeah, our council was number one on the Stonewall Equality Index, the membership scheme for a number of years, I think in 2018 or 2019. They're not now, they've disaffiliated. However, all of those policies are embedded and it's within the corporate culture, so it's going to take a lot of unpicking, I think. But yeah, it's true what you say. And the cuts as well the cuts have had impacts in other ways. So the report that recently came out from Women's Rights Network about the risk to women in unisex changing
Yeah.
rooms, changing villages within leisure services, all of ours have got those.
Yeah.
And it is a cost. It's been apart from it being an opportunity to sort of display this flag
Yeah.
and the DEI virtue points, it actually does save money if you can combine that changing room just into one facility.
Yeah.
Obviously, it comes at great increased avoidable risk to women and children.
Yeah.
And so these are kind of issues that I've been pushing on for a few years, and I'm still, even despite everything that's happened over the last 6 months, I'm still pushing on.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm not going to be rude now about some of your fellow councillors, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking how well informed and articulate you are. And that's not always the case. I mean, we all meet local councillors who've got into it because they wanted a platform for something, or they've got a particular interest in something. And we we've got this. We've often got councils who aren't well informed about issues, haven't we?
Well, definitely. I mean, I understand it. I understand to a degree. I understand the hesitance because I didn't willingly speak out as soon as I realized there was a problem. It took me a little while, maybe a couple of months, to do my research in order to feel confident to speak up about it and express the concerns that I had. Because as soon as I heard about this,
Yeah.
I had concerns straight away, but I got immediate pushback within the left. I was told that they were bigoted views and, trans women are women and things like that. So I went a bit quiet for a couple of months while I did my research and got my confidence up to speak, but I didn't speak up joyfully.
No.
I really was dreading the backlash, that would result from it. I knew it was going to be a really bumpy ride. So I do understand that fear that people have because it can and has trashed the careers and the lives of so many people who
Yeah.
have actually thought, well, what's the problem? I'm just speaking the truth. On the one hand, you think that. On the other hand, you look at what happens to people when they do that, and it's profound,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
So tell us about you and Pride, because you started going really because you were interested in safeguarding. Is that right?
yeah. So I'd seen some things online that worried me. I'd seen some pictures of drag queens scantily clad with little children on the stage around them, sort of taking part in the performance or whatever. When I see things like that, I mean, I've had all sorts of things said to me like, well, have you got a problem with pantomime Danes? Well, if Taylor Swift or someone wore that outfit and danced like that, would you have a problem with that? Almost like you're being misandrist,
Yeah.
or something like that. And I've also had the thing where drag queens there's been a false equivalence made with people who identify as trans. So, because obviously drag it's a performance,
Mm.
it's a sexualized genre of performance that's an evening adult entertainment genre. It's not really appropriate around children.
Mm.
And they weren't toning down their outfits or their performances really
No.
to cater for children. And even if they had been, why does a child need to see somebody doing a slightly sexualized or greatly sexualized parody of a
Yeah.
woman
Yeah.
in order to learn anything or to be more, I don't know. From my point of view, children are pretty accepting of most things.
Mm.
They don't start out from a bigoted perspective to begin with.
Mm.
I've always felt that children don't need to be specially trained, in order to be more accepting of difference
Mm.
and things like that. And I've never understood what drag around children brings to the equation. And I really felt uneasy with what I'd seen. So that's what prompted me to go along the first time that I went along. And that was to the one in Chester. But I was really horrified by what I witnessed
Mm.
when I did go along. So I saw 2 performances of burlesque striptease down to knickers. So
Wow.
the top came off completely. And I saw sale of sex toys, just like a sex shop had been set up within this tent. That children had full access to and were in and out of all day long. And then obviously there was a lot of promotion of this ideology, which, as we know, is a
Mm.
contested ideology. It's an ideology that actually the activism surrounding it has been very hostile to certain groups of people, including some of the lesbian and gay and bisexual community,
Mm.
who don't accept it and find it quite insulting. So it was, and there was fetish wear in the parade. The police were in the same parade as the fetish wear and the children, and it all just felt really wrong. And so I
Yeah.
started to raise issues with that. That was a couple of years ago. And the response that I got from within the council was really quite extreme. And there was a lot of name calling online. There were people shouting out, bigger and things like that in actual meetings. And anytime I asked any questions, whether it was verbal or formal written questions, the leader of the council just completely flatly refused to answer them or would
No.
answer a different question from the one that I'd asked. Um, or I'd be told that it was not within the constitution to ask that question, or I'd be told it was someone else's responsibility when in fact it was the council's legal responsibility. So the amount of obfuscation, the amount of abuse was kind of relentless. That was quite shocking. But I think
Mm.
I think by the time that happened, I'd already had the initial pile on Twitter. So I'd got over my initial shock. But nevertheless, it's such an unprofessional way to deal with an issue.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I've seen any issue dealt with quite in such a way before.
No, but there seem to be constant attacks on the barriers and the ways that we keep children safe. Those sorts of barriers are constantly being battled, aren't they?
I think it's difficult to look at this, and because sometimes when we look at it, we say, okay, well, there's a correlation with lockdown, and there's a social contagion element, almost as if it's happened by accident as a result of lockdown. And I do think social contagion and lockdown had a huge part to play, but it's hard to look at it and not sometimes feel that there is a deliberate push from some quarters to use this as a means to constantly chip away at, you know, boundaries that in the past we all knew where they were and why they were in place.
Mm. Yeah.
It's really worrying. And that's why I feel sometimes there's a stigma there's a stigma if you go along to Pride and you've got any issue with Pride at all, unless you yourself are gay, lesbian, or bisexual, you're open to the accusation of homophobia and just being opposed to Pride per se. You can't question any element of it without opening yourself up to that accusation. But I also think that anyone who tries to have a conversation about the erosion of normal boundaries around children, between adults and children, and the role of men as well, and how the role of men is different to the role of women in terms of who commits these kinds of crimes, who tends to push hardest at eroding these boundaries. You raise those issues and maybe you're, I don't know what, you're distasteful in some way, or you're a bit prudish, or you just hate all men or whatever.
Yeah.
There's always some mud that can be easily slung.
Yeah.
And I think you have to make a decision. Are you going to let that bother you? Or are you going to just do what you think is the right thing to do anyway? But it is difficult. It is difficult because you can get so easily mischaracterized by these people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've been terrifically strong, and so can you tell us a little bit about? I think it was Winsford Pride that you were arrested at.
Yeah. So this was the third Pride event that I'd been along to in 2 years, and I'd been raising concerns for well over a year, a couple of years, about the stuff that was happening. I think the first time I raised a concern, it was to do with Drag Queen Story Hour. Then it was the striptease and the sex shop thing and the fetish gear. Then it was stickers and all sorts of merch, and another burlesque performance and the fire of that him. And then this year, I went along, managed after lots of complaining and being an absolute nuisance, I'd managed to get some decent policies in place. The drag queens who'd worn the inappropriate outfits, the town council had admitted that there was an issue with the outfits. They agreed to check what the outfits were going to be like for this year. They refused to not invite them back. They wanted to make sure that they came back, but they said it won't be a problem because we're going to get them to sign a waiver. So they're not going to be swearing, they're not going to be telling any adult or inappropriate jokes, and they're going to be dressed appropriately. So I did think long and hard about whether to go along or not, because I'd been threatened by somebody, a tall man, who'd held a sign over my head the year before, and kind of followed me around, and that did a bit weird around me. And I'd not been able to get any help from the security when that happened. But the town council had assured me that it was going to be a safe event. So even with that assurance, I still didn't really feel safe going along. But a few of my friends said that they'd come with me. My partner joined us once we were there, and the stalls were great. There was nothing untoward on any of the stalls, so that was really good. We made sure that we were in plain attire so that we didn't stand out. We weren't there to protest or cause a problem. And we wanted to be as invisible as possible, really, just so that we could check everything was in order. And then as the plan was, as soon as these drag queens have both done their thing, we'll leave, we'll make our way home. So it was all okay until the drag queen was making lots of barbed comments about having to sign the waiver. He was really resentful of that, and he kept referring to that throughout his act. But then he made a joke about Rohypnol, which I felt was inappropriate because it was advertised as a family-friendly event by the town council.
And woman-friendly.
A woman-friendly event, yes. Yeah. I know, it's a good point. We kind of get used to not even thinking about our own comfort and what's appropriate. I don't know. But it's not okay. And so I mentioned it to my partner. I didn't say it loudly, but there were obviously some people that were around us listening in, and one of them started to have a go verbally. So I just cut that conversation short, went off, reported the thing. When I came back, he was still having a go at my partner. The drag queen on the stage drew attention to this and announced, basically to the whole audience that it was me causing a problem, and the comment that he made implied that I was homophobic.
Yeah.
So then there was immediately there was booing and jeering and people shouting for us to leave. People started to gather around us. The security gathered around us. The security refused to help us. One of them made it known that he didn't understand what we were doing there and what our problem was. So he let it slip what his actual perception of us was
Mm.
at that point. And then there's a huge crowd. So there's like 4 of us, and then there's eventually about 40 people around us, all doing the thing where they put the flags right in front of your face, right in front of your camera, goading, shouting, being abusive, pushing us around. I called the police, the event organisers who'd refused to help us also called the police. And when the officer arrived, he also refused to speak to me. He spoke to the security, and then by the time I spoke to him, it was just very obvious that he wasn't interested and wasn't going to do anything. And then eventually I moved away from that scrum so that I could be nearer to the stage to film the drag acts from my body cam, because the main reason we were there was to just gather evidence. The thing is, if you don't have your camera on and your camera can't see what's happening on the stage, the minute you're turned away and not filming that thing, or someone stood in front of you, is the minute something's going to happen and you're not going to have any evidence of it. So we kind of made this agreement: no matter what happens, we're not going to assume that anyone else in the group is capturing that evidence. We're going to assume that it's just us, and that way, we should have some decent evidence if anything does go wrong. Not to cause trouble, just to try and make sure that they comply with the really reasonable policies that they put in place to protect children. So anyway, when I got nearer the stage, I got mobbed again. My friend followed me. She got mobbed again. So you can see from her camera angle that they did the exact same thing to her as they did to me, with the flags and all the rest of it. And it was just very intimidating, and it was designed to be intimidating. And everyone could see it was intimidating, including the town council staff, and councillors who'd organised this event, who knew about the threats last year, who knew that they'd failed in terms of child safeguarding the year before, and who, they could see, and the security could see, that there were mobs of people deliberately intimidating us and harassing us. They also saw assaults. So at one point I was assaulted with an actual sex toy, a large dildo. And the woman started the assault with it attached to a belt around her waist, but then she unclipped it to get a better swing at me. They could see this. They could see this, and they could see that it was happening in front of an audience full of children. And yet they didn't do anything to remove her. They didn't admonish her in any way. They saw it. My body cam video footage shows that they saw it, but they didn't do a thing about any of that. They looked for the first possible excuse, tenuous excuse they could, to apprehend me. And that was actually me pushing the thing back at her when she'd swung it at me again. And then I got carted off.
When you say they, who are they?
Sorry, the security guards. Yeah, so the security guards were hired by Winsford Town Council, who organised the event, and got good reason to believe that they'd been briefed against me and been led to believe, oh, she's trouble. So that kind of explains why they didn't do more to help us, because they had this mindset of, they'd been told things that weren't actually true as well. So it was a very strange thing, because there was another town councillor who is very pro pride and very pro gender identity and LGBT and hashtag love, hashtag no hate, hashtag mental health, all of this kind of thing, and hashtag transphobia. And this councillor had spread a lot of rumours about me online the year prior. So things that were said that weren't true. I think the security guards had been briefed along those lines, so that they were already on edge about us. And then when things happened, they just made an assumption that it was us that were the cause of the problem. And anything anyone did or said to myself or my friends, it was almost as if, oh, well, they must deserve it. You know, they
Well,
deserve it.
I feel that a lot, don't you? When we watch what happens to the women who stand up against this, there's a sort of sense that they've somehow brought it on themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's great that we've got, men involved in our movement who are doing great work. But sometimes I look at the work that men do and I think, oh my God, like if a woman went out and did that, if any of us women that are involved in this really know our stuff, quite courageous, women get more harshly punished for
Yeah,
having an opinion about anything, never mind,
yeah,
keeping children safe or anything like that. So yeah, there is a witch hunt element
definitely.
about all of this. And the crowd, it was like a medieval sort of, it was like a medieval witch hunt. They were baying for blood.
It sounds horrible. It sounds
Yeah.
horrible to be, and to have the person on stage, inciting people to go after you and pointing you out is just terrible. It's terribly irresponsible of them. You have a responsibility when you stand on stage and you command a crowd.
It's really bizarre because the initial reason given to me for my arrest was that I had been seen within the vicinity of the stage area and that was causing a risk of a breach of the peace. And I was being arrested to prevent a breach of the peace. That was the reason that we've given. But the breach of the peace had happened from the moment the drag queen had pointed us out and basically turned the audience deliberately against us.
Yeah, yeah.
But that wasn't considered valid. We asked, will you have a word? Will you remove them from the stage? Because the policy was that they would do that.
Mm.
They just breached their policy completely.
So you were arrested, you were handcuffed,
Yeah.
arrested.
Yeah.
You spent 22 hours or
Yeah.
22 hours in a cell. Um,
Yeah.
what happened after that? Once you'd gone through all of that,
Mm.
they told you presumably what you were being charged with?
Yeah, so after the 22 hours or just before the 22 hours, I had an interview with a couple of detectives, interviewed under caution. I had a solicitor with me. The solicitor had seen some of the evidence, some of the video footage, and just said, look, doesn't look like there's anything there to me. I don't expect that you're going to be charged. I don't think it will be wise to do a no comment interview because you've got nothing to hide. You might as well just say your piece. So that's what we did. And then afterwards, he just said, "Oh, because they'd shown us some more video footage from the security guard's camera, I think." And I think they were quite biased in the way that they phrased the questioning. So I'd already explained to them, "Look, here's what happened. This, then I did this, they did that, etc." And then when they played the video, I said, "Well, yes. So as you can see, as I've just said, blah blah blah." And they were saying, "Oh, no, we're looking at that and we see this." And I was saying, "No, exactly what I just described to you happened is what you can see happening there." And I think it seemed to me that it annoyed them that they hadn't got a nice straightforward angle on it. It was quite persuasive the way that they did it. But anyway, at the end of the interview, the solicitor said, "Look, I've got another appointment. I'm going to go off to that. Can't see this being any issue. They'll probably release you within the hour. Don't expect there to be any charges based on what we've seen there and discussed." So when I was finally allowed out of my cell, and that was about 2 hours later, and they said that they were charging me, it was actually quite a shock. And my solicitor wasn't there because we both just expected there wasn't going to be any further outcome from it. So yeah, so I was just kind of released into the middle of an industrial estate. They called me a taxi.
What time
So I
was
just
it?
left. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that.
So you'd been there all night?
Been there all night and I'd not been outside. I'd only been in the cell, apart from to go to the nurse because I had an injury to my hand and I needed pain relief and stuff because I have fibromyalgia. So you're on like a hard surface in a very cold room for a number of hours. There's no seat or chair or anything like that. It's almost on the floor, if you know. It's really weird as well because the window is high up and it's very thick frosted glass, which you can just about see if it's daylight or not, but you can't see the light changing. And you've got no clock and you've got no phone, so you don't know what time it is. And you can't see anything other than what's inside the room. So 22 hours is a long time, really, to be. So, yeah, so that was weird. So, it was a very hot day, very hot afternoon. And I thought, oh, I don't I didn't have any charge left on my phone. I thought if this taxi doesn't turn up, I'm not quite sure how I'm getting back because I don't even know where I am. So that was quite scary, but it did turn up. The taxi driver had heard on the news about what had happened, and he'd seen some of the videos online and stuff like that. So I just felt really bewildered. I just felt like I hadn't spoken to any of my family. I didn't know how my kids were feeling about everything. I knew they'd be really worried out of their minds. I had no idea how it would have been presented in the media. I just really felt shell shocked, and I probably felt shell shocked for about a month afterwards before I started to manage to get my head back together again.
I can imagine that.
It was a really weird experience.
It's yeah, you're taken and sort of suspended in time, and life is happening without you, and decisions are being made without any. You have no control over anything. That's very frightening.
Yeah, I think also as well that is extended beyond the time that you're in custody because once you do come back, you're very busy because obviously I had to try and work out how I was going to get some legal support, how I was going to raise some money. I knew that I'd need to do some publicity in order to raise the money, but I didn't know what I was actually allowed to say on that publicity without causing myself any problems. With the court case, most solicitors want a lot of money up front before they'll even look at your case. So you don't have any initial legal support in the first stages. And then, I wasn't really attending meetings. I was keeping a low profile. I felt like I was on the outside of everything. And even sort of within the women's rights side of things, stuff that I'd normally get involved in and throw myself into, I just watched from the sidelines, which is a really weird feeling for me. I'm not a sidelines kind of a person.
Well, you're describing shock, actually, aren't you? You're at shock. This
It
is
was, yeah, shock, and also people treat you differently. People do treat you differently. There's a couple of people that came forward who've been through it, and it was such a relief to be in touch with them because they knew where I was at with it. But an awful lot of people, especially within politics, until they know what the outcome is, they don't want to be tarnished by
right.
association. So they even in the background, even personally, they don't phone up and see how you are. They'll leave it until they know what happens. Which, if you're involved in politics, I guess you have to be thick-skinned and you have to expect that. But I had it within the women's rights side of things as well. I could feel that I was regarded differently until it all looked as if it might be okay. So that was a very strange place to be. Yeah, not great.
No.
So the first event that I came to, after I came out, no, I hadn't come out of the other side of it. It was before the case had been dropped, actually. The first women's event that I went to was the book festival in Manchester.
Oh, yes, that's where we met.
Yeah, and that was so weird because I was very nervous to be there, actually, and I wouldn't normally be. I'd normally be delighted.
No.
Mm.
I hope you also got some sort of support from being there as well and being out there again.
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was lovely to see people again, and I felt proud of myself for doing it, for going along, because it was really nerve-wracking to go along and be around people again. After that, I felt slightly shunned within our own community. That wasn't a nice feeling, but I just thought, well, I need to not focus on that. I need to just go along and try and enjoy the event and try and enjoy being around the people that I'm used to being around, on these issues, and not overly overthink it. But I was a bag of nerves really the whole time I was there. And I did speak up as well. I spoke up in a couple of the sessions. I felt good that I'd done that. I think it was important for me to go along.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, but it was a very mixed bag for me, actually. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
weird.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's true. So you got to court and
No, well, we didn't even get to court. So there was a 2-day hearing booked. I'd managed to engage the services of Sarah Vine shortly beforehand. I'd also put in via my solicitor, I'd put in some requests for data from the police, which I think possibly persuaded them that it wasn't going to be a good idea to go through with a public court case, those two things. They didn't have any evidence and they'd not given me my evidence. So even my own video footage off my body cam, they hadn't returned to me. They still haven't. I still haven't had it back. I haven't had my phone back yet either. So yeah, I think it was It was great that they dropped it. I think I understand why they did. I think they've given themselves some problems. And obviously, the way that things happen there are a number of areas of criminality and a number of people that are involved in that who I've now had to make crime reports about. And there are question marks around the arrest, my detention, the charging, all of those things. And also just the institutional bias within the police force, because even online, there's lots of evidence that they cannot police at those events impartially. They can't be trusted to do that because of the kinds of training that they have and the kinds of content that they have within their training and their involvement with Pride historically. So yeah, so that's all been quite interesting. I'm still in the middle of all of that. But yeah, the charges being dropped is it's a good thing. But even just in the last couple of days, I've had a phone call from someone who has been kept on bail for months and months, and not been provided with the appropriate information. And after months of being on bail, they've now decided that they are going to bring charges against this person. And that could have catastrophic impacts for that person's career, even though they're being treated really unfairly and not being policed in an impartial way. When you look at the things that have been able to have been said and done and written to me and about me online, even sort of being physically attacked right in front of security guards and the police, it's unbelievable. We don't get any protection, and people get away with absolute anything under the sun. The slightest misstep or perception of misstep by any of us on our side of things, and they're on us like a ton of bricks. And so I think it was good this weekend in Manchester at the puberty blocker protest. The police outnumbered the trans rights activists. That's fantastic. They kept them in line properly, as they should do. And we felt protected and safe, and that's all good. But I think the impartiality of the police has got to be demonstrated by not bringing these malicious charges against people, at the drop of a hat. Yeah. And on the other hand, they shouldn't be jumping to the whims of these trans activists. They've got to stop doing that. And for our part within the movement, when they do that, when they pick our people off and try and intimidate them, wreck their career and their reputation, we have to be strongly in that person's corner, not just online, but we have to be picking up the phone and saying, I hope you're okay. Yeah. We're with you. It's really important, really important.
Yeah. That's a wonderful thing to say. And I'm sure an experience like this changes you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. It's not an overstatement to say that. And also, I have to say there were some people though, and I do love them, who did pick up the phone and who did make that effort. Yeah. But I know that there were other people who discussed my case and discussed me, and then I'd hear about it third party, and that wasn't helpful. We do need to be genuine in the corner of people who are being victimized in this way. So important. Yeah.
Well, that brings me quite nicely to our final question, which is always the same. Because we like to throw the love forward a little and highlight other women who've inspired you or have helped you. So who is your women of the moment?
I'm so glad you said women, because it was going to be difficult to choose one. I'm going to say, well, not woman of the moment, but a really important woman in our movement, Magdalene Burns.
Yeah.
Because she was one of the first women that I listened to when I first started to learn that we had this problem, and her clarity on this issue was just second to none. And she didn't care about what anybody thought about whether she was being too blunt. She just said it as it was, and that's so important, I think. Ellie Reynolds, this is a young woman who spoke at a press conference with Nigel Farage about the grooming gangs. She's a survivor of that. And the press during that press conference tried to hijack it about another issue, a sensational story that had broken, that they wanted to talk about instead. And it was so disrespectful to that young woman, given what she'd gone through. The press conference had been organised to talk about that issue and about the government's failure to address that issue properly, Jess Phillips's failure to address that issue properly. And this young woman, Ellie Reynolds, stopped all of those journalists in their tracks and challenged them directly on it and said, how dare you, deflect away from what we are here to talk about to try and get your sensational headlines. You could do that another time. Now is not the time. That young woman is the kind of young woman, she's working class and she says things straight and she's brave. and she's a survivor. And to me, she's the kind of young woman that we need more of within politics. Very often underestimated, but that's huge strength. So I would choose her. Fiona Goddard is another such young woman who I think we need at the forefront of politics. Principled, strong, outspoken young women, working class women. Maggie Oliver has been amazing. There was a woman, I think she was called Sarah, and she was on WDI International just recently talking about a book called Unveiled by Yasmin Mohammed. And they are survivors of, well, abuse within the religion of Islam. And they are speaking about Islam. They're able to speak about it because they're not going to be accused of being racist or Islamophobic, etc. So they're women from the inside who've come through the other side. And who are speaking about their experiences, naming them. They're brave, brave, brave women, as was Magdalene Burns. I love women who will speak truthfully and in very straightforward terms about their experience, without fear of being told that that the way that they're expressing things is a bit too strong. They don't care. They just say it anyway. And I think politics needs that. Society needs that. So I'd choose those women.
And what a wonderful note to finish on. It's been really inspirational talking to you, Mandy. I take my hat off to you. You've been so brave, and you've pointed out all the places where you haven't had support, and we all need to do better.
Well, I've had lots of support as well. Actually, I hope I haven't made it sound too one-sided, but yeah, it's important for us to gather around anyone who's being picked off and singled out, but luckily, we're part of a strong and very warm movement, and I think we're winning.
Thank you. Well, we definitely are. So thank you so much for speaking to us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you to our listeners. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff to help keep our channel growing and spread the word. Thank you.